Let's go ahead and get started. We'll begin with the pledge. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for coming out tonight, or this morning. And we have the minutes of the December 2nd meeting in the packet, and it was also sent out. Do you have any additions, corrections, or comments for the minutes of December 2nd, 2025? If not, do I have a motion?
Motion to approve. Second.
First by Dean, second by Tom. Any other comments? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody against? Saying nobody? So moved. We have public comment. I can see any names. If there's anybody here to make a public comment, please let yourself know now. Any public comment? I'll call for the third time. Any public comment? I don't see any, so we'll move on. We have a presentation by Mark Reinhardt about the 2025 road safety audits.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for having me. Again, my name is Mark Reinhardt. I'm a senior planner from Bordino and was the project manager for the roadway safety audit study for 2024 and 2025. We just were wrapping up the 2025 year. I'm kind of compiling the report. Actually turned in the study yesterday. I have on the slide here that I was turning it in on the 30th, but I was waiting on a couple last minute things on Friday, so it ended up being yesterday. So I apologize for that minor edit in the PowerPoint presentation. But I wanted to give a quick overview of kind of what we accomplished for this past year. And let's see here if it clicks. There we go. So just for a quick overview, NERC hosted a call for roadway safety audits this past summer, and then by September we had narrowed down and identified 7 intersections within the planning area that we were looking at. So we had one in Lake County, unincorporated in Crown Point, Hobart, Highland, Munster, Hammond, and Michigan City. We completed a roadway safety audit for all these locations that were compiled into that safety study that we just turned in. And our process that we completed for both in 2024 and 2025, I know it's been a little over a year since I've been here, so I just wanted to kind of outline that. Our first step was we established a project management plan that established a schedule, identified data sources and how we're going to collect that data, and then means of communication for this project. It changed a little bit between 24 and 25. Mostly we were able to get some data like traffic counts through NERC versus a vendor like we did in 24. So that was like one minor change that we added to the plan, and then also like the schedule and then who we were contacting from the LPAs changed a little bit because not all the LPAs were the same between both years. So once we got that management plan kind of established, we had our kickoff meeting, kind of used that as our guidebook so we could begin doing all the actual meat of the project, which started with step 2, the data collection and analysis. NERC staff provided us crash data as well as that traffic data that we used. And starting with the crash data side, we used that data to kind of narrow it down to the intersections that happen within a buffered area. And then we looked through, read all the police reports, all the narratives from the reports, and made sure any of the tabular data that had been recorded matched up with the police narratives that had been submitted as part of those reports. Why that sometimes is important to do is because actually at Michigan City this year, we saw a left turning crash that was listed as a property damage, fender bender only, as the crash type and the crash severity. But once we read the police report, we saw that the vehicle, they recorded that based on the vehicle, but the narrative of the officer said that he struck a pedestrian and the pedestrian was injured in that left turning movement. So we changed the severity score based on the most severe injury that occurred at that location and also change that data to show that it was a pedestrian crash and not a typical left turning crash. So that's why that's really important. So once we get that data cleaned and we can start analyzing it, we develop a series of summary tables to look at data trends as well as the collision diagrams to look at patterns that are at that location, and then generate a crash frequency and a crash cost score through Purdue's software called RoadHat. The crash cost is tied to the crash severity, like how many injuries are occurring at that location, and so that we can start identifying potential countermeasures for those sites. Like if we see a lot of left turning crashes, what is something that we can do to try to mitigate left turning crashes at that location? Which helps us pivot over to the traffic analysis side, because the traffic analysis data, that helps understand that capacity can have a factor when it comes to safety. Is there a lot of congestion that's causing efficiency issues, or is there a little too much capacity that's causing speed issues? So we like to look at that data, analyze the existing conditions, find the level of service that's happening at that location, and then build a forecast out to the year 2050, identify an annual growth rate that we all agreed upon between the LPAs as well as NERC staff and us to grow that traffic data out to, so that we can then start thinking through what are we going to potentially see in the future related to capacity and how that might impact safety, and then use NDOT's decision guide that for intersection designs that we can start thinking through. If we need to mitigate left turning crashes, what are some things that we can do, be it left turn signals, making them protected versus just protected and permitted, adding more innovative infrastructure like a roundabout or something else. That's kind of what we're starting doing, that brainstorming internally, so that we can develop a preliminary findings report in step 3 that outlines a lot of that work that I just talked about. Provides a one-page memo, so if you're sharing it with an elected official or a city manager, it's got kind of a quick rundown of what we saw regarding safety at that location, and then has the data tables, the collision diagrams, and the RoadHat outputs from that. So that we can now share that information both with NERC staff as well as the LPAs, and then have a working session meeting to talk about it. These working session meetings were all virtual that we hosted with NERC staff, LPA staff, invited local law enforcement. Not all of them were able to come, but participate, or we were able to get a few that were able to come in and talk with us in those virtual sessions. Talk through that data, discuss any sort of projects that we might not know about that have been happening around their area, or studies that have impact that this intersection has been a part of. That way we can get a good understanding when we start thinking about different long-term and even near-term solutions. Once we've done that, we begin brainstorming together to identify things that they want us to test, especially related to traffic analysis, to make sure that we all are in agreement of if a roundabout is, like for example, a roundabout, if that is a desire that they want us to test, we'll test it. If it's something that we ask them about and they say that's not something we want to do, we want to push that off to the side and start thinking through different things that we want to test at that location. Document all that, make sure we're all in agreement of what's going on or what we're going to test, so that we can move on to step 4, which is the field check, and then developing those RSA reports. The field check, we coordinate that again with the same people. This time we're in person in the field. We did that in December this year. The first day it went from 40 to 30 to 20 all in the same day with snow. It was interesting for sure. But we did that field check with all these different, at these different sites with the LPA staff and local law enforcement. We reviewed that crash data again, make sure it's been a month since we talked about it. Now we're in person. Now we actually can kind of get a sense of what's going on out there by observing those patterns, and also talk through some of that data that that came out of our testing and our brainstorming analysis. That way, while we're there together in the field, we can really identify those near-term and long-term countermeasures and build consensus around them. Because that consensus part is key. It's the last time I got to speak with all these folks, especially in person. So once we have that consensus and really build agreement around what we're going to do, it makes developing the roadway safety audit documents so much easier. We don't need to do any sort of follow-ups beyond once in between the field check and the development of the audits. We can just kind of move forward with our recommendations draft those into an abbreviated engineering summary report that NDOT provides. That's like a 1 to 2 page document, and then all of that data that we've collected and analyzed and talked about, all the minutes and everything are collected as backup material. So everybody has seen all the data and everything that's involved, so really once we hand it over, it's just that front couple pages that needs to be reviewed, or hasn't been reviewed before. But it's summarizing everything that we've already talked about through all those meetings and field checks. Once we've done that, developed those audits, we compiled them all together as appendices into that final study that has a couple page summary kind of outlining this whole process that I just talked about. So that's the process. Now, just for a quick example, I wanted to share 117th Avenue and Parrish Avenue was one of the intersections that we studied this past year. For the crash summary and for crash analysis, we had 29 reported crashes between 2022 and 2024, which for total counts, that's not the highest of the locations that we studied, but the interesting facts that came out of this is that 11 or 38% of the crashes resulted in injury, which is quite high compared to the other locations that we were studying. And then 89% were either right angle or left turn crashes, which are those T-bone crashes that we have at an intersection, the ones that people are the most vulnerable to becoming injured because of those crashes. And the 3 remaining crashes that were at this location were a rear end and 2 run off the roads, and the officers said that it was primarily due to traveling at unsafe speeds. So we see that we got a lot of conflicts happening at this location, and that collision diagram on that page, it looks like just a big blob of messy arrows on there, which normally they tell a little bit better story when it comes to trends, but I think the key trend is like all of it's happening in the intersection. It's not happening on the legs approaching the intersection. The conflict is in the heart of the intersection. And that's something that's kind of unique, because you normally see more rear ends as people like slow down, somebody stops short, somebody speeds up too soon, things like that, but we're just seeing it right there in the heart of the intersection, which is kind of unique compared to a lot of the other places that we studied. Yes?
Just a quick question. If that intersection is at a stoplight, or is that a 4-way stop?
It is a 2-way stop. So vehicles are stopped at on 117th, but it's free flow on Parrish right now, which is a great point, because some of the things that we're thinking through when we noticed that, looking at the photos of the location, we can kind of deduce that there might be coming at a high rate of speed, trying to make a left turn across traffic and try to jump the line ahead of time. Been waiting at the stop sign for a long time, trying to get through. You think you got a window big enough, you gun it, things like that. Some of those concerns. With our road hat results, do you remember doing standard deviation as part of math class, or learning about bell curves in math? With the bell curve, if you're at 0, that means you're at the mean. That means you're in the middle or performing average compared to peers. Road hat does a similar process where it compares intersections to peer intersections around the state. So we were not comparing this intersection in a rural area to an urban intersection in like Highland or Munster. It was comparing similar intersections around the state to this one to generate the scores. In most cases, you want to see a positive score, because that means that you're performing above the average. But when it comes to safety, the more positive or higher the number is, that means the more severe crashes or more frequent of crashes you have compared to your peers. So those 2 red dots I have on the screen are showing that 2.43 for the crash cost and the 3.01 for the frequency means that we're performing in the 99th percentile, or hovering right around that 99th percentile in crash concerns, which means that we're performing quite unsafe compared to peer intersections around the state. So knowing all that information, that helped us start thinking about the traffic analysis. Like, we know left turns are a concern. We know right angle crashes are a concern. And we also know that people are getting hurt. So there's some ideas that we have for safety, but how does the traffic operate out there? We got traffic data originally in October this past year, but we found out that it was a part of a detour route for Klein and 231. So NERC was able to help us out and get some new traffic data collected. That was in January. And this diagram that's up here on the screen is from that January data. The thicker the line is, that represents the higher the traffic volume on these diagrams. So you can see the north-south, which represents parish. That's where the highest number of traffic is operating. And then the thinner lines, east and west, is 117th. Those kind of bend elbows are representing the left and right turns. So we see that there's a lot of traffic moving north and south, way more than actually the east and west. And so that helps us understand that story of why we're seeing all those left turn and right angle crashes. We got such a high volume going up and down, almost platooning up and down the roadway, that you're trying, if you need to make a left turn or need to cross through, it's making it harder to get through. So we summarized that information, shared it with Lake County, did our virtual working session, like I mentioned in the project approach, and then during that meeting, they confirmed with us that detour route that's happening at 231 in Klein. It's going to be constructing the roundabout this summer. There's also a planned roundabout at 231 in Parish, so this intersection might become part of another detour in the future. So it's just some good food for thought while we're thinking through different ideas. But they've identified this as a safety concern in the community. They've done a recent study with Indiana LTAP to do a quick synopsis of what they can do to improve safety out there. They looked at adding overhead red flashing beacons at the light to try to make people more aware of the intersection and add some additional signage, but they really weren't seeing any sort of improvements and we weren't really seeing any changes in the data as well. So it's not just observed, it's observed by them and also recorded the data. And an officer, while we were out in the field check, even said that since adding the overhead flashing lights, some of the crashes that have happened, people are thinking, I see the red flashing light, that means I have it and they have it too, when they actually have the yellow light going through. And that's something that NDOT has actually started moving away from and adding the LED flashing stop signs that's got the LED flashers on the perimeter of the stop signs. And so that's something that's actually part of our near-term recommendations that I'll get to here in a minute, but that's something that we knew from research and talking with NDOT, but it was actually nice to hear it also from somebody in the field observing the data, or the crashes day in and day out. So the outcomes from that working session, we identified 3 things to test beyond just keeping it as a two-way stop control. We did an always stop warrant analysis, a traffic signal warrant analysis, and then also a traffic analysis to see how a roundabout would perform as well. And the results from those, an always stop warrant, we did meet warrant criteria. The MUTCD guidelines has a series of checklists to see what kind of requirements if you meet any of the criteria. Always stop, we did meet it regarding safety. However, because like that traffic diagram we talked about earlier on the previous slide, the volumes on Parish are so high and it's so imbalanced at that location. When we were talking through it with Lake County staff, they felt that it was that imbalance was going to create some problems that might be unforeseen. If it was a little bit more balanced or closer to equal on all approaches, it's true an always stop does perform better. NDOT does encourage pursuing always stops as a systematic safety improvement, but they were still very concerned with that imbalance. So we decided to not pursue an always stop as a recommendation. The traffic signal warrant, even though we do have a high volume or a pretty high volume of traffic on Parish, there wasn't enough traffic in total to warrant upgrading this intersection from a stop control to a signal. So that was a quick kind of move that off our radar for a recommendation. And the other thing too is that the signal wasn't really going to address those safety concerns. Like you're still going to have those left turns, right angle crashes, running yellow lights, trying to speed through a yellow light, running red lights, things like that. So those conflict points aren't really changing even with the signal. Which gets us to that third one, which is the roundabout. As many of us know, the roundabout is a great safety improvement because it gets rid of left turn and right angle crashes, because you always are kind of moved into the roundabout at an angle, so you get rear ends, you get side swipes, but you can't get those T-bone crashes anymore, and you don't have, and you're also going through the intersection at a slower speed. It's also able to accommodate efficiency if you have high traffic volumes at a location, so you're able to maintain some efficiency, which we saw that was a need for Parrish, as well as reducing those crashes. And as we remember from the previous slide, that I showed earlier, 89% of the crashes were right angle and left turns. So if we know 89% of our crashes are that, and we can identify a solution that removes those out of the equation, that's a really great safety improvement, even if it is an expensive infrastructure improvement. So we shared that information with them at the field check. We talked through it. We looked at observed the traffic patterns. It was a very cold, wet day, and that's when the officer was able to share some of that information about that amber red flashing beacon, so that since it's been implemented in the last year or so. And we're able to identify some near and long-term solutions and build consensus around that. And this is a picture from the field check. And so recommendations that came from it, the near-term solutions, we're going to maintain the two-way stop, just based on the concerns around that four-way stop that I discussed previously, but do some additional tree clearing. The northeast corner has kind of a wooded area. Make sure those trees are pushed back so there's better clear sight. But with that updated, or that two-way stop control, we want to make sure that any striping is updated, that we can get best we can get out there. Add additional signage on the north and south legs to notify them of the intersection that they're approaching. There are signs about the railway crossing, but not about the intersection. So it's just adding that additional signage. Add some retroreflective tape to kind of light up the intersection the best we can at night. And then do the LED flashing stop signs instead of the overhead flashing beacon for the reasons that I've already shared. And then that long-term solution was reconstruct the intersection into a single-lane roundabout. Here's a schematic that our engineer drew to help develop the cost estimates for this. I apologize, I don't have the estimate in my hands, but it was able to be a single-lane roundabout, and this would perform both with we tested it with the detour traffic volumes, which were higher than normal non-detour days, and we tested it with both the higher volumes and the lower volumes, and it performed well for both. So this is kind of like those recommendations. So like I said, next steps, we submitted this actually February 2nd, and then this contract wraps up by the end of this month, so we're gonna spend a month working with NERC staff to make sure we feel good about the information that's in the reports, share with the LPAs, make sure they feel good about it, and then kind of wrap everything up in the next couple of weeks. So again, thank you. I know that was kind of long, I apologize. Just wanted to make sure we got through everything. This was a great project to work on the last 2 years. LPA staff has been wonderful to work with, really helpful through the process. Dean, I see you there. You had a few projects that we worked on in the last 2 years, so it's been really great. Open to questions or just move on.
Or just some comments. Did Dean have any comments?
What they've done is terrific. We're grateful to NERC to fund these. I know it was an 80-20 match, and so the cost of the LPA was minimal, right? And so, unfortunately, we haven't affected any changes yet, but I need to focus on that, because last year we did, the previous year, which I guess would have been 24, we did 3 intersections along Columbia Avenue, and we have a appel through NERC to help figure out how we improve Columbia Avenue. These were just outside that limit, so we're definitely looking at improvements, and we appreciate the professionalism that Corvino provided, particularly.
I appreciate your comments. Anybody else?
So I just have a couple comments. First, this will conclude the contract that we have with Corradino for road safety audits, but we do have an RFP open right now. I believe it closes on February 13th for another round of RSAs. So we'll be looking to retain the services of another consultant for another year. And then going forward, I think it's been discussed here before that our intent at NERC, and we've been kind of approved to do this through the TIP process, is to flex funding out of the TIP and into our UPWP on an annual basis so that we will continue to do RSAs every year. This current contract that's out for RFP is a one-year contract, and that simply has to do with the fact that the funding is through the UPWP is a one-year contract that we have with INDOT for those funds. So we will be, like I said, moving forward with a one-year contract, but in the future, we'll be working with this group and with TROC to kind of do funding, set aside funding every 2 years so that we can do longer contracts, 2-year contracts going forward. So that's I guess an update on that. Oh yeah, the other thing that I just wanted to mention is that one of the reasons why we're doing these RSAs is to develop a pipeline of projects that have been vetted through this process that can then be successful applicants for Highway Safety Improvement Program funding, either through NERC, through our NOFA and our TIP, or through INDOT when they periodically do their own HSIP calls for projects. So I would encourage all the LPAs who are here today, when we send out that application in the next probably few months, take a good look at our crash map that we provide and identify locations that we think would be good candidates for RSAs, because that's a great way to kind of get into the hopper, so to speak, for funding for actual projects.
I would just add that we did a comprehensive safety action plan through Safe Streets and Roads for All, and that was my list, right? So I knew what the priorities were, and we picked from the top 10 priorities on that action plan. So if you have one, I refer you to that. If you don't have one, seek to perhaps do one, because that would help sort of shorten or limit the scope. Because if we try to look at the end, well, I shouldn't criticize. I don't mean to criticize. It's going to be harder to look on, I think, NERC's crash study to sort of try to determine where those problems are. And obviously, you want to talk to your local law enforcement to see these are the biggest problems we have.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dean. And I'll also mention that NERC has a grant, Safe Streets for All grant. So we will be developing a regional safety action plan over the next 1.5 to 2 years. So that won't have any data really ready for this round of applications, but in the future, we will have sort of that high crash network and the high injury network developed, which can also be used as a reference for identifying locations, and that'll be throughout the region.
Any other comments or questions? I encourage you all to participate, and just trying to give you a look forward. Tom and I were discussing it right before this meeting, what we hope will happen, and I'm very encouraged by this. I think it's probably the most economical approach to traffic safety, the greatest benefit. If not, we'll move on. Thank you so much, Mark. I'd like to do self-introductions since I didn't do it until George got here. I'm Kevin Brightsky, Porter County Surveyor and Chairman of this committee.
Tom Vanderwood, NERC staff.
Stephen Hughes, NERC staff.
George Stoppel, Union Township Trustee, Porter County, and attorney.
I'm trying to think of smart, I can't. Yeah. Kay Nelson, Northwest Indiana Forum.
Mark Waddell, Town of Chesterton.
Martin Bobcat, Porter County.
Dean Button, City of Hammond.
Tom Schmidt from Sherrill Town Council.
Jeff Hewitt, Town of Sherrill.
Bob Thompson, Valparaiso Transit.
Max Raylander, Valparaiso Engineering.
Kathy?
Candace Eklund, NERC.
Eric Stillwell, nursing staff.
Yes, sir. Martin?
Reinhardt, Oreo.
Chris Murphy, Structure Point.
Terry Martin, Gary Beal.
Michelle Murray, 37 West Indiana Forum.
Dave Barrett, Lockwood Litter. Mitch Barlow, NERC staff. Jake Amaral, Butler Fairman, and Cypher.
Alex Lester, Public Fairman, Cypher.
Charles Bradsky, NERC staff.
Jenny Munhart, yes, engineering. Grace Bettinger, nursing staff.
Scott Weber, NERC staff.
Greg Belkowski, Council.
Thank you all for attending, and this is proof to your bosses that you are here.
And if I could add just one thing, you can make sure you sign that attendance sheet so that which is out on the table in the hall, so that we have an accurate record when we produce the minutes of the meeting.
And also update your phone numbers, your emails, and sometimes company names. Let's go to planning 4.1, Grace Benninger. We're discussing resolution 2601, adopting 2026 safety performance measure targets.
Hi everyone. Today we're going to be discussing the annual adoption of the 2026 performance measure targets. This is linked to our quarterly performance measure reporting and the development of the performance measures dashboard. However, unlike our quarterly reports, the targets that we're going to be adopting is for the entire state and based on a rolling year average. So the following numbers that we'll be discussing, we would not expect to see solely in our region. However, it's important for us to adopt the state performance measures because they are linked to NERC's eligibility for Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HSIP funding. So since 2012, federal law has required state departments of transportation as well as MPOs to conduct performance-based planning. Specifically, DOTs and MPOs are required to set targets for the federally required performance measures as well as report on the progress in achieving those targets. So determining whether or not we're moving towards those targets or away from those targets to help assess overall transportation network performance. The other major reason for adopting these performance is that it is federally required that the targets are included in NERC's Metropolitan Transportation Plan as well as our TIP. So in 2024, INDOT developed statewide targets and distributed them to MPOs for adoption. These are based on a 2% straight line reduction from the 2021 baseline 5-year average. So HSIP requires that INDOT and NERC establish targets for 5 safety performance measures, including number of fatalities, rate of fatalities per 100 vehicle miles traveled, number of serious injuries, and that serious injuries are incapacitating, non-fatal injuries that prevent the injured person from conducting activities that they were capable of performing before the injury occurred. And then as well as rate of serious injury and the number of non-motorized fatalities and non-motorized serious injuries. So I just wanted to point out that MPOs do have the option to adopt state targets or develop their own regional targets. However, typically regional targets are set when local priorities justify more aggressive targets than what the state sets. And additionally, the state has the Indiana Strategic Highway Safety Plan, which outlines a state-led performance management framework with a technically grounded and rational methodology for setting statewide targets. So here are the recommended targets for 2026 compared to 2025. You'll see that fatalities, we recommend 794.7. And again, we're not advocating for this many deaths. We are, again, just producing a number that is in line with, again, that 2% reduction over that 5-year average. So the fatality rate of 0.992, a serious injury of 2,965.5, serious injury rate of 3.702, and a vulnerable road user and fatalities and serious injuries 462.96. And so it's also important to note that NERC adopts the statewide targets due to data sets and data systems being statewide, including the ARIES report or crash report system, and as well as the state having a strong influence over investments in the area, including the number of INDOT projects that's included in NERC's TIP. And again, definitions, reporting periods, calculation methods, and baselines are consistent in using the state's framework, which is important for compliance with federal highway.
Grace, why is the non-motorized injury target so much higher?
Yeah, so there were inconsistencies in the ARIES crash reporting system. So from 2019 to 2022, Federal Highway came out with a different classification scheme for the nature of serious injuries. And so this was corrected in ARIES 6 by INDOT in having the right classification. However, ARIES 6 was starting to be rolled out in 2023 and wasn't adopted by all local police agencies until 2024. So as we go through some of the data, you'll see results of that, as well as inconsistencies with the ARIES, as well as some miscalculations by INDOT in the 5-year trend resulted in these numbers appearing to be or greater than the 2025-year targets. However, through that recalculation of that trend line, it is a 2% reduction. However, it does appear greater than the 2025 targets.
Yeah, so what you're gonna see in some of the following slides is you'll see a line that shows a 2% reduction on the targets that differs from the chart that you see on this slide. As Grace said, they had to basically go back and correct that trend line, but the 2025 target that was adopted is based on different data. So that number is different, but the trend line is more accurate. That's more official, but the trend line is more accurate. I don't know if that makes sense, but we had the same questions as we were reviewing this data as well, but the main thing is we're really just looking at this target, and it's a target to reduce crashes.
Yeah, we can't emphasize enough for the viewers out there especially, that this is not to exceed, hopefully, these ones. Our goal is to have 0 in all these categories.
Right, yeah. Adopting these targets is more of an agreement and acknowledgement of INDOT's plans and efforts to reduce those numbers. All right, so looking at fatalities per year, INDOT uses both the Fatality Analysis Reporting System, or FARS, data to report on fatalities in combination with the ARIES data. FARS is a nationwide census that's different from ARIES in that the data source is not just through the police reporting method, but also through coroner and death certificates, hospital records, as well as driver and vehicle registration files. Overall, there's been a steady decrease in total fatalities since 2022, which again has been helping that trend line to decrease. And even though the average is increasing, it creates that 2% reduction being a fairly ambitious goal. So fatality rate by year. The rate is calculated as the number of traffic fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. And this accounts using a rate for how much people are actually driving and more accurately shows fatality risk relative to exposure. Again, this running average is slightly decreasing, which helps this target be met more so than the total number of fatalities. And so this metric serves as a clear benchmark for tracking the overall system safety and allows fair comparison over time.
If you go back to that, there's a pretty big decline between 2022 and 2023. Do you guys know why?
Not specifically. Potentially NDOT's Highway Safety Performance Report would specify that specific trend, but we don't necessarily have any sort of speculation for why the data is showing that.
Okay.
So serious injuries per year, again, you can see the steep rise in serious injuries. That's due to the discrepancies, again, in how injury nature was defined in ARIES. This is a metric that's used to help reveal traffic safety problems before they escalate into fatal crashes. And serious injuries are also used with fatalities, as there is a very small chance if you're involved in a serious injury or a serious crash, whether you will have a serious injury or fatality. And so that chance is hard for us to control in any sort of transportation improvement. So that's why both are used as a way to assess severity. And so the last metric that we adopt targets for is for our vulnerable road users, looking at both the fatal and serious injuries per year. And again, you're gonna see that sharp increase, again, using that serious injuries metric due to those definition discrepancies. We'll use this metric to show the performance of the transportation network for all users, especially for users that are most prone to injury due to the lack of physical protection. So you can see, again, the discrepancies from that stark increase. So our next steps would be for the Transportation Committee to propose a favorable recommendation to the full commission, and then have the full commission adopt resolution 26-02 or 1, and then have that forwarded to NDOT, and then once they approve that, we would post the changes to NWI 2050 Plus and our TIP online. And again, it's just important to note that adopting these targets are not necessarily an enforcement threshold, but are, again, just tools to be used in NERC's planning process and development of programs. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions for Grace? I think it's pretty straightforward. It's a must-do.
Move to make a recommendation to adopt these performance target measures by the full commission.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Kate. I have a first and a second to forward the adoption of forward recommendation for adoption of resolution 2601. All those in favor signify by saying, go ahead. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? So moved. And the motion does carry. And next I have Tom Vanderwood, who's going to give an update on the 2027 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. This is just for information.
Thank you. I'm going to give a brief introduction, I guess, to the update to our Metropolitan Transportation Planning. I'm sorry, our Metropolitan Transportation Plan. As you probably all know, because you've been here over the years, every MPO is required to, as part of their planning process, adopt a long-range transportation plan called a MTP, Metropolitan Transportation Plan. This is a plan that sets regional policy for the development of the transportation network to facilitate the safe and efficient movement of people and goods. It's required as part of what they call the 3C planning process, which is continuous, comprehensive, and cooperative. And it must be long range, meaning that it must have a 20-year horizon in terms of the forecasting of the location of people and jobs, as well as the projects that are included in the plan. It must be fiscally constrained, meaning it must show that there are adequate resources available to fund the improvements identified in the plan. And in a non-attainment area or a maintenance area, it must be updated every 4 years. So our current long-range transportation plan, or MTP, is NWI 2050 Plus. That was adopted by our commission on July 20, 2023, with an air quality conformity finding issued on April 17, 2024. So in terms of the updating of our MTP, the clock starts at the date of the conformity finding. So our plan, NWI 2050 Plus, must be either replaced or updated by 4 years from April 17, 2024. So we have till April 17, 2028 to adopt an updated plan. NWI 2050 Plus was developed to incorporate a number of emphases from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is the current transportation authorization law. Among those emphases are focus on climate and resilience, focus and a kind of a new focus that was introduced on integration of housing with housing and land use with transportation planning. So when that plan was developed, because there were some new things that needed to be focused on, it included what I have here stated on the slide is broad outreach and deep dives into a number of topics. So there was a significant amount of outreach that was used to develop these plans, and there was some very detailed work conducted in the areas of active transportation, housing, freight, climate resilience, and transit. As part of that plan, though, it did not have an extensive sort of vision setting component. It actually carried forward the vision of the NWI 2050 plan, which was adopted in 2019. And that plan actually continued the vision of the 2040 plan, which was adopted in, I believe, 2012. But in any case, it must be updated, and it must be an update is actually a legal definition in the regulations, and it means it must undergo a comprehensive review, incorporate the latest available estimates and assumptions for population, land use, travel, employment, congestion, and economic activity, must have a public review and comment period, must demonstrate fiscal constraint, as I said, and there must be a conformity determination. So we're at the first stages now of updating NWI 2050 Plus in order to meet that 4-year deadline. So our plan internally is to not conduct a major update similar to what was done for NWI 2050 plus, but actually to do a very kind of limited but focused update of the plan, check all of the boxes from the federal requirements for an update, and then really focus on how do we implement the strategies that were identified in that NWI 2050 plus plan. So what we plan to do is, as it says here, carry the vision and major goals of NWI 2050 plus. We will not extend the horizon year, so we're going to keep the 2050 horizon year. In general, we're going to maintain the overall organization of that plan so that active transportation, land use and housing, environment, climate and environment, those major chapters and those kind of sub-components will stay the same. But we will be incorporating new data and public and stakeholder feedback. So we will be looking at all sort of the performance measures and the data benchmarks that we included in NWI 2050 plus, updating those to the most recent estimates and counts that we have. And we will be conducting not only stakeholder engagement work with our committees, but we'll also be doing an entirely public process. So we'll be going out and getting public feedback and public input on all aspects of the plan. And then in addition to that, there will be, as I said, checking those boxes. So we'll be updating all the technical components of the plan. That includes the socioeconomic forecasts, which is the location of people and jobs up to 2050, developing a financial plan, and then of course doing an air quality conformity determination to ensure that we're meeting our emissions budgets. As I said, the major focus though will be on specific implementation actions. So the next slide, I kind of have it's a draft project timeline, and the reason it's draft is because we are still kind of working on that public engagement strategy. So some of the steps of this process that are based on public input may be adjusted a little bit in terms of the overall timeline, depending on, scheduling of events and things like that. But the first phase of the project we're calling regional profile and performance, and this is what you planners might consider to be sort of the existing conditions phase. So what we'll be doing is we'll be developing this regional profile and performance report. It will document existing conditions and performance measures. We'll also be developing a plan and policy summary. So we'll be looking at state, federal, and other regional plans, synthesizing the goals from those plans, and summarizing the major strategies and implementation actions in those plans. We'll be then presenting that to our committees along with stakeholder groups in order to assess the progress that we've made towards our goals. At that same time, we'll be reviewing all of the strategies and what I'm calling implementation action areas to determine what has been accomplished, what has not been accomplished, what is not going to be accomplished because it's no longer relevant, and what we kind of need to focus on going forward. So there'll be a pretty robust engagement with local governments and other stakeholders in sort of this assessment and analysis portion of the plan process. We'll also be taking that information, that existing condition information, out to the public to get feedback in order to identify priorities. So what are we learning from that data as far as what is a concern to the public? One example that we just looked at was safety. We can see where we are, how are we performing in terms of safety. And then we'll also be soliciting for potentially new strategies and actions that we can do to implement those goals of the plan. And then, so that'll be a very kind of intense, hopefully, period where we review and update all that information. Going into the next phase, which we're calling plan recommendations, That'll be where we sort of finalize all of these implementation spreadsheets that we've developed. We'll be linking those to themes and goal areas. We'll be prioritizing those. Along with that, we'll be conducting outreach to our local governments to develop our socioeconomic forecast based on their comprehensive plans and understanding of where they're going to be growing. And then we'll be developing a financial plan. In the background of all that will be sort of another track, which is shown on the bottom here, which we're calling transportation. We're actually preparing the plan document and putting that out for public comment and review, and then adopting by June of 27. So that is a rough sketch of where we're going as far as how we're going to update our long-range plan. Again, as I said, this is going to be a very light update. I would expect that the update that follows in 2031 will be a very much more sort of robust update in terms of new goals and new perhaps a new vision as well. But for now, yeah, our focus will really be on benchmarking what we've done since the adoption of 2050 plus, and then identifying some priorities for getting us to that next plan.
Do we have any questions or comments for Tom? Okay.
Surprise.
Thank you. No.
This process, are all the MPOs doing this simultaneously?
No, it just depends on when they last adopted their
Okay,
MTP.
and the reason I asked that is because with Representative Pressel being a neighbor here and being head of the Transportation Committee, and you talking funding and budget periods being 27 and 29, when would we want to, make certain he understands and get some sort of advocacy going for those dollars coming from the state? And I may be totally off because maybe that's already in place somewhere else. Tis the legislative season, so.
Yeah, so I think it's a good question. If that were going, if we wanted to, I guess the way that we would do that is, so that happens kind of during the financial plan portion of it, where we're identifying resources to fund the projects that we've included in the plan. A financial plan can include both existing resources, but it can also include potential funding or what they call like innovative financing mechanisms. So there's sort of maybe two pieces to the financial plan. One is you have to be fiscally constrained, so you have to show that there are available resources. But then if you wanted to, you could be a little more expansive in that plan and say, well, we've also identified the need for additional resources to cover, additional projects. The long-range project list cannot exceed, the cost of those projects cannot exceed any reasonably expected revenues. So unless you have a reasonable expectation that additional revenues will be available, you can't really include them in your plan. But you, in terms of a fiscally constrained project list, you can include an illustrative list of projects which are non-fiscally constrained. They're not funded, but you can say, if we were to identify additional revenue sources through working with the legislature or whatever, we would then fund these projects. And then, because this is a 3C process, which is continuous, you can amend the plan as revenue becomes available.
There's so many avenues here to go down. I mean, could you modify an existing grant project like a community crossings or a wheel tax type of thing through legislation that would provide you this funding? Given the SEA 1 changes that are going to be going on at the local level, do you work to see to it that a portion of the local option income tax can go to a savings account for a road project that hasn't been in existence before as a bank account in the municipality. There's just some creative ideas that I have no clue if they make any sense at all, but just, perhaps it's kind of fun to talk to legislators because sometimes light bulbs go off in their heads that don't go off in ours. So just an option to consider.
Yeah, I think those types of ideas would be part of the financial plan. I can tell you that the financial plan for NWI 2050 Plus looks primarily at federal federal funds that are available. And not to get too deep into the weeds, and Scott is here too, he knows a little bit about this as well. We have various levels of detail that we're required to include in that financial plan. So the first 5 years, which is the tip, it's the same as the tip basically. We have to show great detail because those projects are actually programmed and they're going to be happening, they're moving forward. As we get to those later years, we don't need to show as much detail, and we don't need to even show per year how much revenue we have available and how we're going to spend that. We can use what they call bands. So you can do a 5-year band. Say within this 5-year band we have X, hundreds of millions of federal funds available, and we have X or Y millions of dollars of projects that we expect to spend it on. So you only have to show that that federal number over 5 years exceeds what you expect to spend on projects within the 5 years. I can tell you our current plan, the resources vastly are vastly greater than the projects that are included in that plan. So.
Any other questions for Tom? If not, let's move on. This was for information. Stay tuned. Programming. Fiscal year 2026-2030, Transportation Improvement Program, Administrative Modification, number 2619. Charles, you're all set.
Good morning, everybody. Almost 2 weeks ago, we had a Transportation Resource Oversight Committee meeting, and several things were discussed. And one of those items that pretty much everybody agreed upon was that that NERC would be more public and more transparent about its administrative modifications. We talked about what is administrative modification and defined that, and what is an amendment for our TIP. So the first part of this is the report that I will give at every transportation committee. I will not give it at the commission, but I will give it at every transportation committee that comes going forward. And that is an administrative modification memo, but I will tell what's going on with administrative modifications. Before that, this is just an email that I send to NDOT. They make changes. These are minor changes. It could be changes in location if something's not correct. It could be typographical, it could be Scribner's errors, or it could be minor changes in funding. And most of these are minor changes in funding. Looking at page 11 of your packet, 11 to 14 actually is the memo with the different, there was actually 4 projects in the January administrative modification, which is 2619. You can see that there were 3 projects for NDOT and 1 project for the city of LaPorte. And you can see for the city of LaPorte, they moved a project from fiscal year 2027 to fiscal year 2022. fiscal year 2026 to fiscal year 2027. And then the NDOT projects. Now, we do not control NDOT's projects, but we do show them in our TIP. So NDOT does come in and made these changes in our TIP. As you can see, there is a one project they were reducing funding for a bridge, intersection improvement. They increased it by just under $100,000. And then there was another road rehab. They also increased by just under $100,000. The $100,000 is our current definition. Anything $100,000 or more is our current definition for an amendment. So anything under $100,000. Anything under $100,000 is an administrative modification. So on pages 11 through 14 is the administrative modification report, as well as a list of all projects. And again, going forward, I will, at every transportation committee, this will be a report that I will give. And if there isn't a meeting that month, then I will probably, the next month I'll probably have for the last 2 months. Every month on the 20th, or somewhere right before the 20th, I send a list of changes to NDOT for administrative modifications. And then every quarterly, we send in amendments. Any questions on the administrative modifications?
Yes, sir. Why don't you move on to the next public comment report?
So moving on to the public comment report, this is for our quarterly amendment, 2604.1. The amendment was put out for public comment on January 2nd and closed on January 23rd. These are just infrastructure projects that are exempt from the air quality conformity, and these are not any transit projects either. NERC did not receive any comments during this time on any of the projects on this amendment. NERC staff also sent the amendments to the interagency consultation group on December 22nd. I know this was right around the holidays time, but we did not receive any comments. Therefore, we did not receive any comments from members of the ICG, so therefore concurrence was given on January 2nd. Moving on, the TIP amendment that I just mentioned, 26-04.1, on that project, on that amendment, there were 4 NDOT projects, as you can see on page 18 of the packet. And you can read these. So, and like I said, there were 4 projects for NDOT, and then there were 6 projects for the locals, for the local local municipalities. 1 for Gary, 1 for Griffith. Hobart had 1, LaPorte County had 1, Long Beach had 1, and Porter County, the town of Porter had another. Long Beach and Porter were eliminating projects.
Any questions for Charles on TIP Amendment 2604.1?
That list of projects starts on page 21. And NERC is asking for a favorable recommendation to the commission for this amendment.
So that'd be resolution 2602 for fiscal year 2026-2030 TIP amendment number 2604.1. Do I have a motion?
Chairman, I move to make a favorable recommendation for Resolution 2602, Amendment 2604.
Thank you, Dean. Do we have a second?
Second.
Who seconded it? Mr. Bob? Bob Thompson seconded. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody against? So moved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we have reports from our partners, Try Clean Indiana. Are they here today? Try Clean Indiana doesn't have a report. Other business staff announcements, anything pertaining to acceptance of committee appointments? None. Staff updates and announcements? I don't see anybody. Upcoming NERC meetings. This Thursday will be Environment Committee, February 5th, 10 o'clock in this room. Leadership Committee will be February 10th at 8:30. Economy and Place Committee, February 11th at 8:30. Is that correct, George? Then NERC Full Commission will be February 19th at 9 o'clock. So we will hear the resolution forwarded today on February 19th at 9 o'clock. The next Transportation Committee meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, March 3rd at 10 o'clock in these offices. Anything else good for the cause? Do I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you. How about a second?
Second.
I was gonna say dies for lack of a second. God help us. Everybody, nobody has any place to go. Never mind. All those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.